Welcome everybody to the Museum of Science and tonight's Subspace event. My name is In-Soo Hyun and I am the director of the Center for Life Sciences here at the museum. This year in 2025, we are shining a spotlight on what it means to be human. So we're directing our programming, all our various teams to come together under that theme and provide content that touches on body systems, mental health, communities, innovations. And what's wonderful about the year being human in those themes is that tonight, many of those themes intersect, and we're so delighted to provide the program tonight entitled Democracy is a Disability Issue. Now, the museum can't provide this content on its own. We have to partner with content experts and communities around us, and that's where our partnership with Perkins School for the Blind comes into play. We have a series of different collaborations happening throughout the year, this being one of them. Now, there is an opportunity for each of you to participate by asking questions or submitting comments online, and you can go to slido.com, enter the code #democracy, and there you'll be able to enter comments, questions, which will be addressed here on the stage after the panelists have had their conversation. So it's my pleasure to introduce the wonderful Santi Lacey. Santi is the founding executive director of the How Innovation Center at the Perkins School for the Blind, where she's catalyzing and convening key players from startups, academia, industry, and government to drive innovation in accessible products and services for the disability community. Now, Santi has extensive innovation experience in government, where she served the Commonwealth of Massachusetts under Governor Patrick. And she's also a 3 times early startup employee who loves studying how technology and design can be used to improve the human experience. Everyone, Santi Lacey.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here and online. It's really fitting that we're gathered here tonight to explore democracy is a disability issue, because 250 years ago, just down the street in the North End, a man named Paul Revere laid his head down to go to sleep, not knowing that the next day, fate would come calling. He would wake up and he would go on his famous midnight ride, a journey that would help ignite the American Revolution and birth our democracy. Revere worked with what he had available to him at the time. He had a lantern to light the way, he had his voice to carry the message and deliver it, and he used a horse, obviously, to spread that information faster. Today, we have so much more at our disposal with technology to ensure our democracy is both accessible and protected. When Revere rode through these streets, he was spreading information to ensure everyone could participate and be aware of the momentous events that were about to unfold. Our conversation tonight continues that tradition, examining how information, access, and participation remain central challenges, particularly for the 1 in 4 Americans who live with a disability. At Perkins School for the Blind, we witness daily how innovation bridges gaps between intention and access. Technology has created unprecedented opportunities for people with disabilities to engage with the civic space. Yet technology alone cannot solve our systemic issues. True democratic participation requires thoughtful design of our institutions, our public spaces, and how we conduct civic engagement. When we design democracy with disability in mind, we strengthen it for everyone. Tonight's panel brings together experts whose insights will help us explore how democratic participation can be enhanced for people with disabilities and how the disability perspective can strengthen our democratic institutions. But before we move on to the panel, I want to invite everyone tonight to consider your own role in this disability democracy conversation. Because just as Paul Revere spread the word to his fellow patriots who were prepared to fight for our fledgling democracy, each of us can become messengers and for a truly accessible civic engagement. Whether you identify as having a disability or not, democracy thrives when we all recognize barriers to participation and we work together to dismantle them. When we commit to a shared responsibility for allyship, we honor both our democratic principles and we honor our common humanity. In fact, somewhere across the state right now, my 5-year-old daughter is taking the stage too at her school talent show. And yes, I'm very sad I am not there to see it. Hopefully my husband is taking video. But she and her classmates, they're in kindergarten, they're performing What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. But they're not just singing it, they're also signing it in American Sign Language. And knowing that these young children are embracing accessibility from such a young age, it really does fill me with hope. This next generation is already learning that true communication means reaching everyone in ways that work for them. This is exactly the principle that must guide our democracy forward. So I look forward to a rich discussion that continues the work that began with that Midnight Rider nearly 250 years ago today, and that my daughter and all of us in this room and online can carry forward for years to come. So with that, I'm very thrilled and honored to welcome our panelists. First, our moderator, and we can come up as I call names, I guess. Ethan Zuckerman, Associate Professor of Public Policy, Communication, and Information at UMass Amherst, and Director of the UMass Initiative for Digital Public Infrastructure. Santi Garces, Chief Information Officer for the City of Boston. Helen Michaud, Vice President of Product at Clear Ballot. And my wonderful colleague, Kim Charlson, the Executive Director of the Perkins Library. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks so much, Santi, and thank you to everyone who made it out tonight. It's just wonderful to see a room full of people here and to have a really important conversation at this moment in time about the nature of democracy at a moment where I think democracy is on a lot of people's minds. I know that I have been making it through the last couple of months by writing and rewriting the syllabus for my fall course, which is called Defending Democracy in a Digital World. And I thought I would share with you in 2 minutes what the first week of that course is. When we talk about democracy, we're not just talking about elections. We're talking about the public sphere. We're talking about how we find out about the world, how we deliberate with one another, how we make decisions about who we want to lead us and who we want to serve us. And in the United States, we have not a majoritarian democracy, but a liberal democracy. We don't just let 51% of people decide that what's good for them will be the law for the land. We protect smaller groups. We work very, very hard to make sure that the rights of all are protected and that the voices of all are protected. Democracy, where all you have to do is get one more vote than the other person, is pretty simple. Liberal democracy is really hard because trying to figure out how to balance the interests and the need of such a huge set of people with such diverse needs, interests, wants gets incredibly challenging. And this gives us a wonderful opportunity to think about democracy in the context of disability. As Sandy pointed out, a quarter of Americans live with some sort of disability, but generally speaking, when we think about democracy, we're not always thinking about the challenges of someone who's visually impaired making it to the polls. We're not always thinking about the challenges of someone who has a hearing impairment participating in an event like this one, not all of which are as lucky to have a wonderful ASL interpreter working along with us here. So this challenge of figuring out how to make our democracy open to everyone is one of the supreme challenges of our current moment. And thinking about democracy as a disability issue gives us this ability to say, is our democracy really working for everyone? And we're going to look at that question through the lens of some of the remarkable people that I'm sharing the stage with today. We also have a great chance to think about democracy and disability at a moment of enormous technological change. We are in this amazing space with a gorgeous rotating planet behind us. There are exhibits all around us, and I will point to your attention on the screen above our heads. There is remarkably good closed captioning happening in real time. This is an AI system that is listening to my voice, didn't need any training, didn't need to hear me ahead of time, and is capable of complementing what our ASL interpreter is doing for people who might have a hearing impairment associated with it. This is a moment where technology looks like the world could be much more inclusive. And even more dramatic technologies are being developed by some of the people in the academic communities we're surrounded by here in Boston. Eric Gordon over at Boston University, Deb Roy over at MIT are working on systems that try to help leaders like Santi, who are trying to listen to the public, summarize hundreds of thousands of points of view, solving one of the hardest problems in a democracy, which is listening at scale. So we're at a moment where being reminded that democracy needs to serve the whole population, meet the needs of everyone, even if those needs aren't held by everyone. And we have the moment of technological change where if we steer this moment correctly, some remarkable things could happen. We have with me on stage 3 people who are capable of taking us on that journey. Sitting across from me is Kim, who has amazing experiences as a longtime activist and advocate on inclusion around democracy. We have Helen, who does incredible work building products that make our democratic systems, our electoral systems, open to a wide swath of the population. Directly to my left, we have Santi, who for the city of Boston is thinking about how to meet the needs of all of our residents, and I do mean all of our residents. So we have a wonderful group of people to take these subjects on. I want to start, if I may, by talking to Kim. And Kim, I wanted to see if I could bring out a story that we talked about a little bit when we were preparing for this. You have worked for years and years to ensure that people with visual impairments have an ability to vote and have an ability to vote on their own. And you were telling me a little bit about the bad old days when voting was a process that involved multiple people and you weren't able to have a secret ballot. Can I get you to talk a little bit about that and what's changed subsequent to that?
Absolutely, and thank you, Ethan, so much, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. So, about almost 50 years ago, when I was 18, it was one of my proudest moments to be 18 and be able to go to the polls and cast a ballot in my very first election. And, you know, I knew how people went to the polls to vote, so I kind of went to the polls to vote, thinking that my experience would be like everyone else's. And what I experienced was certainly not denial of my right to vote, because that's a fundamental right of every citizen of our country to be able to vote. But because the ballot was not accessible to me and I could not read it myself, I needed assistance. And I found out that the law required that I have 2 people with me so that my ballot would be marked correctly. And as I reflected it, it was a Democrat and a Republican had to be there with me while I was read the ballot aloud, and they would mark it for me, and they had to verify that that was the process. So
Thank goodness we don't have a parliamentary system where there were 10 parties to choose from. Could get very crowded in there.
So that's what I got, and it really didn't, I was shocked, but I wanted to vote, and it sort of solidified my resolve that someday we would have a process where I could go into the polls and I could review the ballot independently, I could make my selections privately, and I could verify the accuracy of my ballot independently at the end of the process. And I'm happy to say that that has come, and I can certainly talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about, so first, for those of us who have not had that experience of voting with assistive technologies, how does the system work? How are you voting now when you're going to the polls? And then tell us how we got to those systems.
So the journey began really for utilizing technology to make the election process accessible around the early 2000s with the Help America Vote Act, legislation that was passed by Congress to ensure that all people had the right to vote privately, independently, and have it verifiable so that they could confirm their ballot. So that accessibility also required equipment to make that process work. And so it took many years, because just because the law passed doesn't mean that the equipment was there to install instantly. So it took a lot of advocacy from the blind and disabled community to say, we need the accessible equipment. So today, it's possible now to go to any polling place in Massachusetts, and I'm particularly proud to be a resident of Massachusetts because they take that seriously. And we have accessible voting equipment that works for people with low vision. You can magnify the screen. If you don't use the screen, you can turn it off to ensure your privacy, and you use a keypad to navigate with speech output and review your ballot listening to text-to-speech. So for many years now, I've been able to cast my ballot independently, and it's just something that I value. I never miss an election. It could be the tiniest little local election. It doesn't matter. I went to the polls once, and the poll workers told me, they said, oh, well, we weren't expecting any people like you to come, so we didn't set up the machine. And I said, well, I'm here now, so you better set it up. So, it's just a fundamental right, and it's so important to me. But I think, evolving technology, we all lived through something about 5 years ago called a pandemic, and it had a lot of impact on a lot of things. And one of them was the election of 2020. And the disability community, Massachusetts passed legislation to make it possible for every resident to have the opportunity to vote by mail, which was great. You didn't have to go out. You didn't have to be exposed. That's wonderful. But a paper mail-in ballot is not accessible for someone who doesn't have the ability to read print. So I was very proud in August of 2020 to work in partnership with the Disability Law Center as the lead plaintiff in an emergency petition that was filed to the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts on behalf of 6 individuals and 2 disability advocacy organizations to request that the Commonwealth provide a process for an accessible mail-in ballot. And that process was online voting, having the ability to receive a ballot in your computer, whatever smartphone technology, computer technology, and to be able to mark that ballot independently, to return, well, to mark it, to review it, and ultimately to return it independently. Initially, we had to print it or save it as a PDF, which was a pretty complicated process. Not everybody has a printer in their house anymore. So after that first election, which is a primary in September 2020, we went back to the Supreme Judicial Court and we said, we need the ability to return our ballot so that that isn't an obstacle in the way of a person with a disability voting. One of the 6 people that was a plaintiff in the petition was a woman in Boston who uses an iron lung and doesn't have the ability to go out to vote independently. She's restricted to home because of that. So she, for the first time, had the ability to vote independently on her own using her computer technology. And I know the pride and that she had in that first opportunity to vote independently. It means so much to the community. We don't take it for granted. We're going to advocate, and we're never going to let anybody take it away from us.
Kim, I think the examples of the ways in which we've been able to come up with different technological solutions to make it possible for blind people and people with low vision to vote is this sort of amazing example of what we can do in situations where we commit to accessibility. And in, maybe the most central act of participating in a democracy, the process of voting, we put into very sharp relief this need to empower and involve people. The actual work of this is being done in part by companies like ClearBallot. Helen, you head up product development over at ClearBallot. Some of these systems are the systems that you are working on. What's the biggest barrier at this point to inclusion in elections when we're trying to figure out some of these challenges that Kim is rightly putting in front of us? This idea that our ballot be private, that we be able to verify it before we send it in, that people are able to access the polls if they have a limitation like an iron lung or these things. When you sit down to work on these problems, what are the biggest barriers that you find yourself wrestling with?
Well, there are a range of barriers, I think, and I think Kim has touched on a lot of them, and I don't think I can summarize them more eloquently than she has. But what we work on at ClearBallot is we very much focus on supporting the jurisdictions who run elections and giving them the tools to run smooth, accurate elections year after year. And so we really focus on making the act of voting accessible. Right? So the act of voting has really taken many forms and formats across different states, across the years, from the big lever machines where you had the booth where you could throw the big lever and mark your votes and then throw the lever to open the curtain, to the infamous punch card ballots with the hanging chads, right, which led to the Help America Vote Act, to touch screens that are more like ATMs as an experience for voting, to what's I think familiar to many of us in Massachusetts, which is a ballot that you fill out by filling in the ovals, right? Which most experts agree now that the paper ballot is the gold standard for running elections from a security and auditability perspective, but as Kim described so eloquently, it's not very accessible. So where ClearBallot prides ourselves is by making that paper ballot accessible. So building tools that allow voters with disabilities, whether it's vision impairment or cognitive impairments or motor impairments, a wide range of potential disabilities, to be able to vote privately and independently without the Republican and Democrat looking over your shoulder or marking it for you. Being able to verify what is about to be printed on your ballot. What we do is we print a ballot that is identical to what every voter would otherwise be handed at the check-in table. We just fill in the ovals for you. And we allow you then to take that and then put that in a scanner and also have the scanner confirm these are the marks that I'm seeing on the ballot, so you know that your intent was accurately represented before you then go ahead and cast the ballot.
Right, so in some ways, a world in which we were all voting on touch screens, this was all purely electronic, we didn't have a paper record associated with it, would be a lot easier from a technical point of view. But there's been this huge move in the voting community to try to create a paper trail so that there is auditability. This seems to be where everyone agrees that we need to be to have as high as quality as possible elections. Elections are also becoming flashpoints for engagement, flashpoints over access, lots of dispute about how people can vote. During the pandemic, we ended up with lots of mail-in balloting, which made voting much more accessible for many, many people. We've now had a counter-reaction of some forces trying to pull back mail-in voting. How do those tensions, how do those conflicts affect the work that you and Clear Ballot end up doing?
Yeah, so I joined Clear Ballot in 2019, which seemed like a really interesting time to get into elections, and none of us knew what 2020 was going to be until it happened, right? Both starting with the pandemic and the scramble to expand access to mail-in voting. Sometimes election dates actually had to change, which had previously been kind of unthinkable in order to accommodate the logistics of running an election in a pandemic. We were really proud that one of the early versions of Clear Ballot was really built with vote by mail in mind. And we had worked with a lot of states who are primarily vote by mail states, like in the Pacific Northwest, in Colorado. And they saw real value in how we helped them with the process of tabulating mail-in ballots and doing what they need to do in terms of reviewing the ballots for voter intent. For example, if you mark the wrong candidate, right? If you were voting in person at the polling place, you'd probably go back to the poll worker and say, can I please get a new ballot? I messed up, right? But if you're voting by mail, it's a lot harder to go and get that new ballot. So in many places where they do primarily vote by mail, they instruct you, if you've made a mistake, cross it out neatly and then mark the candidate you intended. And that means on the back end, as the jurisdiction receives your ballots, they need to review and look for those marks and not just assume that what the machine sees is what the voter meant. So we created tools that really helped jurisdictions with that kind of review. So we were very happy that with the expansion of vote by mail, which was quite an adjustment for many jurisdictions to make who didn't have the volume or the proportion of vote by mail that they had in 2020. We really helped them, we think, deal with that additional volume.
It sounds like we really could have used you in Palm Beach County round about the year 2000. I'm glad you're on it now. I want to expand a little bit beyond elections technologies because where we sort of started this conversation was this idea that elections in many ways are sort of a centerpiece of democracy, but we have much broader questions of participation in the public sphere. We also have questions of what services democracies deliver to us. Santi, you have a really hard job. You are responsible for the information systems for the city of Boston, an enormous, complex number of systems. And one of the things that I think is so interesting is that you see accessibility to the blind, visually impaired, other disabled communities as central to that work. And one of the things you've said to me when we've talked about that work that you're doing is that this accessibility work makes the work as a whole better. How does that happen? How does designing for inclusion affect the tools and systems that you're building? And what are both the challenges and the positives that come from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's an honor to be here. So I think that for us, one, we have a mandate from our mayor, Michelle Wu, to make Boston a home for everyone. And for us, that means, and especially in the context of democratic participation and our job, it means getting relevant information out to people, not only about elections, but also about how to participate in decisions that are happening around planning, around streets, around parks, and also being able to gather information from the public and pass it back to decision makers. So again, whether it's broadcasting school committee meeting or the council hearings, all of those things are important. They're part of the democratic process. So for us, we've recently partnered with the Perkins School and also with our Disabilities Commission at the city to rethink how is it that we gather data about people in the disabilities community. And by listening and by being humble and learning, we decided that the best way to gather that information is, because it was done in collaboration with others, was to gather information about accommodations and not about disabilities, because we don't need to know about what's going on with you. We just need to know what you need to interact with us. And I think, again, to the point that we shared in our conversation, when you design things with accessibility in mind, you design them in a way that are clearer, that are more relevant, and in a way that makes it a little bit easier for other people. And like if we think about even the way that we design the right-of-way, if we have ramps and we have things that are easier for people to navigate, maybe that's what they prefer, and we get more people to participate and enjoy the spaces and the experiences that we design. So I think that whether it's content on a website or whether we're thinking about information about our parks and information about what the council voted on, there's a great opportunity for technology to enable and enhance those experiences.
So this question again of how we take services that are essential and essential to deliver to everyone frames these questions around design in a really interesting way. We can't say, here's a 95% solution, it's going to work for most people. We don't have that luxury, wrong word, when it comes to designing a voting system, when it comes to design information systems for the city. I love this inversion that you're making of going from designing for disability to designing for accommodation. Give me a project where you had to think really creatively about some of the accommodations that people needed and really change something as far as critical pieces of city information or city services.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of a project that we worked on. So generally the way that the council registers votes, the city council is the legislative body of the city and they vote on a large number of items. And we have many years worth of records of the things that they voted on and what council member voted for what measure. But the way that we record that information is the city clerk writes a description of what the measure that was voted on. And those descriptions are very legally accurate and not very easy to understand unless you pay close attention. So we started building a prototype of a version of the website that has 20-word summaries of what the vote was about. We use large language models to generate that summary. And then we went and evaluated the accuracy of the summaries. But again, it created a much better and a unique experience for people. It makes it easier for, regardless of whether you need a screen reader or not, just to be able to see if there's a thing that you think is relevant to find that information. But it also makes it easier for people that are using a screen reader to find information that might be relevant.
And so the accommodation here is, I am not a lawyer. I can't read, multiple pages of legalese. But just to make sure that everybody sort of understands what's going on here, this is a really interesting and novel use of AI. You're taking a very complex text, you're asking something like Claude or ChatGPT to do this work of giving, a complex text in 20 words or fewer, so that it's possible for someone using something like a screen reader to interact with it. Potentially, everyone benefits from that, whether or not you have a visual disability, simply because you don't have to think like a lawyer anymore. How do you get your head around using these new technologies for civic purposes like this that have really high importance? How do you get comfortable with this new technology works well enough that we're able to use it in this case?
Yeah, I think one is embracing the fact that we don't know everything and that it requires some humility. So it's usually talking to people. There's actually people from members of the council and other folks from the public that were like, hey, the version of the website that where you post these roll calls is actually not accessible, is not a very nice experience. And I think that government, when it's doing its job right, it acknowledges that it's not doing a good job and that we could do better. And we start thinking, what are ways in which we could improve the experience? And I think that it's not thinking about technology, right? It's not, we need to use AI for the sake of using AI. It's just, where do we think that a particular tool meets a purpose? And in this case, creating a simpler summary of what the vote was good. It just made things better in a way that was novel, that we wouldn't have to go back 19 years in history and create the summary for each one of those. So we were able to create the summaries for about $4 worth of tokens, and we are able to do it only once. We don't have to, it's not a chatbot, you don't have to keep doing inference, just do it once. And we tested it, and then we're putting out these tools and how we did it out in the website so people can make their own mind and tell us if they think that it's good and we should do more of it, or if it's a bad idea.
The scale of these challenges, once we start getting into the details, can get pretty overwhelming. If you think about how much work we've had to do to make sure that voting systems are accessible, we think about something like a planning process. We have rowdy, confusing, highly participatory meetings. If you're coming into that meeting setting with an audio processing disorder or a hearing-based disability, that could be an amazingly challenging environment to work with. I want to see if I can put it to the panel. When we think more broadly than electoral technologies, when we think beyond the voting box, when we look at problems that we want to tackle of civic engagement and civic participation, Kim, what's the sort of next frontier that you want to work on in terms of accessibility or accommodation to make sure that we're getting full participation in our democratic processes?
I was hoping you were going to ask that question, because I would say the other passion I have is around information access and digital accessibility. So information access, what Santi was talking about was, providing plain language so that it's understandable for people. I think that's terrific. What I think about in my career work as the executive director of the Perkins Braille and Talking Book Library is access to the printed word, because that's something that people who can read take completely for granted. And to me, that's a civil right, to be able to access information. We hear it a lot, that knowledge and information is power. And if somebody doesn't have access to information, it creates powerlessness. So So that's one of the areas where I believe that my work in accessible materials, braille, audio, large print, digital, electronic access is so important to our community to make that information, whatever it might be, accessible and available to someone who needs it. The other side of that equation for me is digital access, website accessibility, e-commerce, and just being able to, go online and renew my driver's license and have the accessibility I need. Not my driver's license. I don't want to scare anybody that I drove here tonight. But my ID driver's license that I have, I want to be able to go online, conduct business with the Commonwealth or with the federal government, just like anybody else is doing these days, pay my taxes, do all those things. And the system needs to be accessible so that I can do that with screen reader technology, which is speech output, screen magnification. Accessibility is just fundamental to that. And that, to me, is a part of our democracy, making our government available and accessible for people with disabilities.
And I would go further and say that it's certainly incumbent on folks like Santi to make sure that government sites are accessible, but so much of where politics, civic life, so on and so forth takes place are social media sites, newspaper sites, all of these different things. How often do you find you're unable to do business, to get the information, to carry out a service? Give me a rough percentage of sort of approaching the internet through a screen reader of how often this works and how often it fails.
It's getting better, but I still say that 30 to 40% of the websites I visit are not accessible.
Yeah.
And depending on what websites people go to, the percentages might be different. I tend to go to a lot of government sites. Thank goodness those are accessible because we have the Americans with Disabilities Act that has requirements for digital accessibility, and government has a responsibility to do that. It's a little more challenging with Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act that applies to the private sector, companies, businesses, corporations, and what they need to do. There are requirements, but they're not as stringent as those for government agencies and organizations. And there's not clear guidance for public accommodations and what they should be providing with accessibility. And you would think that with business, every dollar that could be spent with a company should be of interest to that company. And people with disabilities have income to spend. And our money's just as good as everybody else's. And we should have the ability to spend it where we want to spend it.
And there are increasingly good tools that do accessibility checking, that make it possible for people to figure out changes, which are often quite simple, that people need to make to make their sites more accessible. Helen, when you look at this and sort of think beyond the voting booth, when you think about this larger question of working from accommodation rather than working from disability, what are other civic systems that you sort of find yourself thinking about, find yourself imagining taking a crack at solving?
Oh, I mean, there's there's a lot out there. Our focus really is around, as I said, primarily voting systems that help us run elections. We also work with jurisdictions to audit elections as well. So kind of flipping this a little bit, we've been talking about kind of leading up to the act of voting and then the actual voting, but what comes out of that process, the result of that is, election results, reports, and as you kind of alluded to earlier, there's been, it's been a bit of a flashpoint in recent years, whether these votes and results can be trusted. So this is not necessarily a new frontier for Clear Ballot because it's actually where we started, is with auditing elections and providing visibility into the results and basically doing a parallel count of of election results and presenting side by side. Here are the original results as reported by a jurisdiction, and then our independent count of those results. And they usually differ, by one or two in a couple places, because these two systems don't look at a ballot and read the ballot the same way. So you would expect, because they're independent implementations, to have some variation. But you can see that, by and large, the right people won, right? And the votes were accurately counted. And that's I think, a wonderful thing to be able to show that you can have confidence in a system.
I've had the wonderful experience of working with technologists in sub-Saharan Africa who've been building parallel vote tabulation systems in autocracies. And so the ability to look at elections in Mugabe's Zimbabwe and demonstrate through a parallel vote tabulation that this was not, in fact, an accurate election. Of course, we're now getting to the point in our country where we want, this sort of certainty that comes through this. It feels like another piece of this has to be taking those very complex data sets and making them accessible to people who are blind, who are visually impaired. Is there work sort of being done around being able to visualize data or physicalize data that's particularly interesting to you as you think about questions like auditing?
Yeah, I do know that some of our customers, they have been particularly dedicated to providing rich sources of data. So they try to export information from our system in a variety of different ways so that people can slice and dice them in, plain CSV or Excel files that are very manipulable with a number of different tools, right? So it's not just, here's a presentation of some information in a PDF and it's static, right? So we like to be able to support as much of that as possible so that people can kind of do their own analyses and draw their own conclusions.
Santi, when you were talking about these sort of participatory processes, like planning processes, is that something the CIO's office is taking on? How are we thinking about that sort of very difficult problem that I suggested of taking a planning meeting with all the chaos associated with it and making it maximally accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, some of the things that some of our teams were a complex cabinet of technologies, and sometimes so our teams broadcast every meeting through the city's cable channel. And for instance, another thing that we worked on that we're very proud of is working with Commissioner Michaud to ensure that if there's a public TV available in any restaurant or any public space, that they turn on the captions. And in turn, because our team broadcasts all of the planning meetings, everything that is recorded, that is done by the city or the council, we started paying also to put captioning in all of the content that we generate to enhance the experience. We support hybrid meetings, so we support meetings so that people can participate when by Zoom, and they might not be able to attend the council hearing in person. So there's a number of ways in which we can bring that experience and have people's voices literally in the room where the decisions are being made. And besides that, again, there's a number of different ways we work with the team that does the participatory budgeting process, and then thinking about the problem of how you get raw, unstructured text to try to discretize it and figure out what are the kinds of projects that people would want to do is also a really fun data problem. And all of it is trying to figure out how is it that we bring the right voice at the right point so that we can be informed. It might not be the thing, but whatever we end up doing might not be the thing that you wanted, but at least it is a thing that you got you to weigh in.
You're looking at a huge number of technologies. You're evaluating what the city might want to embrace, what the city might want to implement. What technology are you most excited about right now in this space of democracy and disability, or I think as you're in many ways doing a better job of framing a democracy and accommodation? What technology do you look at and say, we're going to figure out how to use this and this is going to change things for us?
So I would express both excitement and skepticism about the same technology. I think generative AI is very interesting, and some of the multimodal models, again, they're expensive tools. Environmentally, they're not good because they consume so much energy to generate.
I'm going to get you to translate now from techie into normal person.
Yes.
Multimodal models.
Yes, so there are a lot of, thank you. So a lot of these new technologies are also able to go between different modes, as in like go from speech or visual to text. So those are the multimodal capabilities of some of these newer models. But they're exciting because they address some of the things that you were talking with Helen. All of a sudden, instead of going and seeing, for instance, if you went to our open data portal and you wanted to see what are the types of 311 cases that people in Beacon Hill or Roxbury are putting in, it'd be really difficult to do if you were not able to either go and see the data or go and process and navigate that. But with some of these tools, you're able to interact with the data and ask questions of the data, sometimes literally use your voice to generate computer code behind the scenes that is going to go and do the math operations and then tell you back in speech the results.
Right, so the answer may not be trying to figure out how to create translations of all the possible visuals. It may be to actually turn this into an interactive conversation of one fashion or another, where I can literally go in and say, okay, I want to know what are the top 3 reasons for 311 calls in Roxbury, and compare Roxbury to Beacon Hill.
Absolutely, and you could decide that you want to do a statistical comparison, see if the results are just random or if there's some statistical reasons behind seeing the disparity. We run surveys of our residents, and for instance, the #1 reason that people tell us that they don't trust city government is they think that we offer a different quality of service to people in different neighborhoods and people from different backgrounds. And you can, in fact, go and see if that is true through the data that we publish in the open data portal.
And this is something that cities have been trying to do for a long time. There was a whole move towards open data really under the Obama administration. There was this hope that suddenly we would make this data accessible and we would have lots and lots of people going and looking for it. It turns out that most people have a very hard time reading a raw CSV file and drawing conclusions from it. Again, this is one of these situations where something that is making accommodations may turn out to be helpful to all of us in the same way that translating from long lawyerly statements into 20-word statements might turn out to be very helpful. Kim, how about you? You are looking at a lot of different technological innovation in your work at Perkins. What's exciting to you? What do you find yourself looking at for yourself personally and for these larger issues of inclusion of blind and visually impaired populations?
So some of the things that I think make a huge difference and that I am excited about is definitely inclusion and inclusive opportunities, expanding the opportunities for participation of people with disabilities in community and civic engagement. And the tool that has done more to make that possible for the disability community than just about anything else is video conferencing services, Zoom, Google Meet, Teams, those platforms that 6 years ago hardly any of us ever used and now are just almost a common daily occurrence in our lives. That has opened up so many opportunities for people with disabilities to engage with government, to be more involved, serve on boards, have their opinions and their voice heard, where it was so much more challenging to do that previously because of barriers like transportation, to get to a place, to attend a meeting, or not being able to get out because of a medical situation. So I think that that technology has done a lot for all society, because I think Santi would agree that before Zoom, citizen participation in government was minimal. And it has just exponentially grown, and the engagement, if you take away a hybrid meeting, you're going to hear from the constituents in your community, because they now expect that level of accessibility, whether they have a disability or not. Childcare, all those barriers out there that keep people from being engaged, they've been much more minimized by the convenience and the accessibility of remote or hybrid meetings. And you know, we all can attest to the fact that sometimes there's challenges around that, but there are certainly opportunities and advantages, and the disability community this year advocated with the legislature to make sure that hybrid meetings in our cities and governments were not just an option, but that they continue to be required. And I think that that's important for all of us. I guess the other technology that I'm excited about is some aspects of AI, and we're all talking about AI, but there are many tools out there that can help, particularly people who are blind or low vision, to get information. So while we take full advantage of an app that can describe the environment outside my car window as I'm riding along in my car, not driving again, but riding, and it will tell me what we're passing. AI can tell me, you know, where am I? It's a great thing for somebody who's blind to know. If you're in an Uber and you're starting to like, which way is he going? I can ask, where am I? And it will tell me the address I'm at. And then I could go, okay, it's good. There must just be a lot of traffic because it's taking 3 times longer than I usually take on my rides. So that kind of thing helps. AI helps. But the other caution that I always talk about with AI is, particularly with people who have disabilities, is we have to make sure that the language models and the data that's being used by the AI tool doesn't have inherent bias against people with disabilities.
Right.
Screening them out of applications for job pools because they see that they have a disability and inferring right away they can't do the job.
This is so important to talk about. I was at a wonderful talk earlier today at Harvard by Arvind Narayan, who's one of the co-authors of a terrific book called AI Snake Oil. And we ended up in a conversation about the danger of biases in particularly predictive systems. So we've seen in the past that systems that have used AI to try to make hiring decisions end up reinforcing past biases. Amazon tried to create a system to automatically decide whether someone would be a good fit for Amazon, and it screened out women. In part because Amazon at that point had a real corporate culture problem, and in fact women were a whole lot less likely to thrive at Amazon. And so it would simply find, you know, a mention of women's sports on your resume and then sort of put you out there. There's the danger of ways in which blind and visually disabled people aren't fully included, getting that reinforced within these systems. I think it's a great thing to point out a concern about. Helen, I know that you love the physicality of these things. You love making things. You love, you know, are there any things sort of coming up, whether it's 3D printing or sort of some other aspect of this, that you're excited about your ability to make devices, make things that go out into communities, give us more access? What sort of things are you looking at?
Sure. I think as a product manager, I don't get as involved in the how or in the specific technology that we're going to apply, but more in the problems that we're trying to solve. So we've been working on a new generation of our voter-facing devices that people will be able to use to vote in future elections. And some of the things that we're adding to that platform are kind of exciting. And we've been working with the Perkins School to make sure that the decisions that we're making actually support the needs of end users. Right? So some of the things that we're doing are enabling a voter to come in and use their own personal assistive technology, switch devices that they're used to using rather than just whatever may be present or not present, depending on what accommodations have been made in that particular polling place. Another feature that we were working on was the ability for somebody to vote, to express their choices, to create a ballot, and then to cast that ballot, all without manually handling the ballot, which the stated goal for that was to accommodate people with mobility impairments. But then speaking with one of our consultants from Perkins who was blind, an end user said, "Oh, this is great. I would use this because I've had instances where I'm going to cast my ballot just like everybody else. I've got it in my hand, and people are trying to be helpful and want to take the ballot from me to help me cast it, and I don't need that help." So if it can be set up so that my ballot will automatically go into the scanner and nobody will feel tempted to help me with that, that's a value to me. So it's really gratifying when we find things that we're building for one purpose that can then actually help in other ways too.
I think this idea in particular that people are developing their own set of assistive technologies, whether it's the way that Kim is traveling through the world or whether it's the way that any number of us are using different assistive technologies. My iPad ends up being an assistive technology for some of my vision issues, lots of different things that we're all trying to use and accommodate, sort of figuring out how we're going to do that. We're going to open this up to Q&A in the room. I also just wanted to remind people that I think you have a QR code on your seat that will let you put some questions in Slido. Oh, it's on the screen. Wonderful. So for people who might want to aim a camera at the screen, you can also send us a question online. I will read that if you don't feel like stepping to the mic. But I believe in a room like this, more than at least one person is going to be brave enough to step to the mic. Ask some of these smart people some questions you have about democracy, disability, accommodation, some of the interesting topics we've talked about here. Can I convince someone to come and step up and join with us? Come on up. Come on up to the front here. If you can. Otherwise, we can absolutely get someone to run a mic back if anyone is not able to get up to the microphone. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much for doing this. I'm Alex. I'm 6'3", brown hair, beard, glasses, very pale from winter. Kim, I'm curious about organizing an action because you've done so much in over a sustained period, which is so impressive, and that the stamina that takes and dedication is significant. The experience you gain is significant. In your work on making voting more accessible, I'm curious what the biggest sort of impasse you ran into in trying to get that work done has been over the 25 years of doing it, and how you overcame it, because I think a lot of us are wondering right now how we can take action and what happens when we run up against significant barriers. Thank you.
So just for anyone for whom that wasn't clear, there was a question about, a question for Kim specifically about the biggest barriers, the biggest impasses you've found in this process of ensuring that blind people are able to vote.
It's a really good question, and it's one of those questions that kind of keeps me awake at night these days, because a lot of the advocacy work that I do with partners, with other disability advocates, just sometimes getting the word out to people what the problem is and what we're pushing back for or against is a challenge in itself. But then also finding the right people who are decision makers and getting them to listen is also often a challenge. And to hear that, you know, something Ethan said earlier tonight about, you know, in our democracy, in our society, we shouldn't just be listening to the quote majority. We need to listen to people who are not the majority and what their needs are and how to accommodate them and incorporate them and bring them into our community. So I think the one thing I've learned in all my advocacy work is persistence, because some people, you know, join the advocacy movement because they're excited, they want to see change happen, and change often happens slowly, but system change is what jazzes my boat. I really like system change. I want to do the bigger picture. I want to make it happen. Sometimes it takes a long time to change a law or implement a policy or get a regulation changed. And I just tell people we got to keep at it, because sometimes the system is built to dissuade us by making it take a long time, and we can't give up. And so don't give up. Allies out there are so important to the work of people with disabilities who are advocating every day. So everybody has a voice, and everybody can help us make that system change that makes me so happy.
Santi, Helen, I just want to pick up something that Kim said, which is this importance of listening to people who are facing barriers, making sure those voices get heard. Who are you listening to? Who do you talk with to get a sense for what these barriers are that you're going to work through? Santi, who's informing you and sort of helping you get this broad perspective on the tools that you're building for the city?
So I think the people that I always worry about are the people that are not talking to us.
Yeah.
So we try to figure out new ways, new channels, new ways of engaging. And I think that sometimes it means that you have to come out of your comfort zone and do what the mayor asked us to do, which is take City Hall out of City Hall and go and ask people. And it can be intimidating because we have big, complicated jobs, and sometimes even keeping the train moving is intimidating. It's scary, and I think that going in and asking someone else what might not be going well can feel really terrifying. But I think that government is a collective thing that we build, and if you don't think that it's only a thing that I have to do, but maybe that we can do together, I think that's what we've done with the Perkins School and with others. Help us make it better. Tell us, I think that's helpful.
Helen, who helps you navigate this? Do you have a group of people you regularly work with on this? Are you going out into communities and finding people and testing tools? Is it co-design? How do you work with people on these systems?
Yeah, so Perkins has been a really great partner for us along those lines. So in the past, and we were just talking before with Kim, that she's participated in some of the usability studies and test events that we've had where we shared the device that we're about to release and invited a wide variety of volunteers to come and attempt to vote with it and tell us how it's working.
Yeah.
Which has been really rewarding for me, because usually watching somebody vote is frowned upon. And I loved having
the chance to break that taboo. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to really see how the things that we're building are performing, as they're meant to be used. So that's been very exciting. And recently we've kind of even deepened our partnership with Perkins, and as I mentioned, been able to bring them in even earlier in our design process and really have an ongoing conversation, so that we can make sure that the choices that we're making are really the things that serve our end users.
Well, we have managed to get to the point where we have some questioners lined up. Kim, I'm going to tell you, we have a a real tendency here of bearded men taking the mic. So we've got a second bearded man at the mic, and I am also a bearded man on the mic. We'll go to the gentleman standing in our audience.
My name is James, and I'm from Watertown, and my question is actually for Santi, and you could fill this room with things that I don't know about the law, but I'm wondering what, if any, people love to make legal challenges, especially in this day and age. And I'm just wondering, though, with the work to summarize, have there been people stepping up to say, now I don't know about that? Or are people have been generally more thrilled not to have to go through a prospectus-length interpretation of the proceedings?
Right, so the question here is, as the city of Boston is starting to use AI in these creative ways to increase accessibility, we could imagine in our increasingly litigious society someone challenging this. Santi, have there been challenges?
I don't know if challenges about a particular use, but I think, again, generally, we embrace collaborative design and involving people. I think that it also involves, when you're designing things that are more accessible, you also have to be willing to accept that you're going to make mistakes. So I think that we are always worried that we're going to get sued in government, and sometimes we're not going to get sued. Or maybe if you talk to the person who's upset, you could avoid a lawsuit by just listening.
We'll just tell them to talk to Kim.
We're encouraged to do that. So far, no. But you know, I think that right now we feel also good about people's ability to sue the government if you really thought that we're doing something perverse. All of the things that we do are subject to public records laws. Like if you just wanted to know what we were doing. And again, for us, like we've just been, because of the mayor that I get to work with and the city that we get to work in, we just put a lot of the information up front anyways. And if someone thinks that there's a better way of doing it, we let us know.
It's also a good reminder that in the American system, for better or for worse, lawsuits sometimes are how we make change. Kim was talking about suits in the Supreme Judicial Court that got us to the ability to vote by mail. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
I want to make sure that we can get everyone in if we possibly can. We've got another friend stepping in the mic.
Hey, my name's Larry. Also have a beard. I'm a 5'10" black man. Currently a researcher at Harvard Medical School doing research on accessibility, which is becoming banned. So that's just interesting times we're in. But I resonated with what you said, Kim, earlier about making just general e-commerce accessible for people who are disabled, because I was doing a lot of e-commerce consulting before now. And I'm just curious, like, do you have, or actually the entire panel here can answer this one, like, what do you think is going to take it for companies to actually care about acquiring those customers? Because from my experience, there wasn't that much of an interest.
And Larry, I think this is a great question more broadly, which is, on the one hand, we know from Sandy that a quarter of the American population has some form of disability. We don't always think about the audiences that we may be turning away. In some cases, this may just be questions of our ability to understand what these barriers are, where we go. So I would love it if anyone wants to weigh in on this question of what would it be to get companies to take accessibility seriously, really sort of going beyond government. In many ways, y'all have to take it seriously. How do we get some of the energy and the good thinking that's coming out of things like the City of Boston and get it into the rest of the commercial sector?
Well, I'll step in and answer
please.
that. So, I mean, I'd love to challenge my colleague Sandy Lacey to answer a little bit of this question, because data is a tool that the disability community has used to try to impress upon the public sector and the private sector what the disability community has as far as purchasing power. We all have People with disabilities have families, they have connections, they have friends, and we don't usually hesitate to tell our family and friends when we have a good experience with a company or when we have a bad experience with a company.
Yeah.
So using our power of purchase and influence is one way, but Sandy has done some amazing work in the How Innovation Center to get data about the power and the influence and the numbers in the disability community to influence manufacturers and entrepreneurs to think about, including that sector in your business plan. And I don't want to put her on the spot, but
I'm here, Kim.
she's great, and she could really add some great things to this conversation.
The data point that Kim is hinting at, it's $18 trillion worth of annual disposable income is what people with disabilities and their allies control. And when I actually first heard that figure, I was like, well, people with disabilities and their allies, how many allies are they actually considering coming up with this number? Is it 10 people for every one person with a disability? And it's 1.8 people. I'm pretty sure most people with disabilities have more than 1.8 allies.
I think so.
If your airline booking system is not accessible and your family is going somewhere, guess what? You're not buying your tickets on that website. So it's not just losing the dollars of the person with a disability, it's their community that will also not follow. It's a large number.
Thank you so much, Sandy. We're going to take one last question, and thank you so much, Larry.
Hi, my name's Rachel. I'll be your alternative to bearded men tonight.
Thank you.
Big old white woman with blonde and purple hair, 5'2", built like a weeble, except I do fall down.
And clearly a stand-up comic, or should be.
So I love all of this. I'm on board. I'm madly in love with all of these ideas. Also, the current system is such that in order for anything to be implemented, it has to go through the government, including the state government. Right now, the state government is stalled out on accepting or looking at any kind of new technology for voting. And in order for us to have voting technology, they are required by law it can't work. It can't be used until the state approves it. There was briefly some talk of eventually looking at what's out there, and then that went away. And now people are voting on machines that are too old to reliably work. And of course, we desperately need this technology, but what is being done? What are folks doing? Some of y'all don't get paid if people don't use your tech, right? So what's being done to try to work that in? Because right now there's a big barrier up there, and you can have all the best ideas in the world, but if it can't get approved for implementation, it doesn't matter. And apparently people yelling that they can't vote isn't doing it. So what are your ideas?
Right, so this is a great question about not just technically how we build these systems, but also how we get them approved, making sure that states are allowing people to do this. I'm going to go to Helen, since this is literally your job.
It is in the area of my job, for sure. When we work with our customers are usually the local jurisdictions, like towns, counties, people who are doing the real work, right?
Absolutely.
And you're right, though, the states do limit the choices that those entities have, that people who would love to have a good experience for their constituents, or even good tools for themselves to use. It is a bit of a frustration for us in working in this particular area, because every state has its own specific flavor, and it's wonderful that there are so many different ways that we can vote in this country, but sometimes those regulatory hurdles do make it hard for great ideas to get out to the people where they can really make an impact. So I think having, your point that, people, voters saying, this is not working for me, sometimes it's hard for that message to get through. I think going to those people who are responsible for running the elections, they do have more, they have more of a voice when they go to the state and say, look, you are here to serve me. We all agree that we need to run good elections, so what can you do to help me do that?
Kim, do you want to weigh in on this? You've literally worked on this for decades.
And it's an absolutely mind-boggling issue that I've been dealing with, especially in the last few years, because our technology here in Massachusetts is aging out, and a lot of the equipment is just not functioning very well anymore, and what are we going to do about it? And it is a process. One thing I've learned over the last few years is that Massachusetts and people with disabilities in Massachusetts are happy that we've got a statewide accessible voting equipment system rather than a jurisdiction by jurisdiction decision. Some states might not like that, but generally having the same equipment, whether you live in Springfield or New Bedford or Boston, when people move from community to community, their voting experience will continue to be the same. So I've been a big advocate for statewide certification of voting equipment. The other issue that has come up is, and it falls into the data and the verification of the election process, is the paper ballot. Some systems don't have a ballot that looks like everybody else's. Some systems give you a small receipt that prints out at the end. It gets scanned like everything else. Sometimes people don't like to have that little slip of paper receipt because it makes their ballot look different from everyone else's, and they've just lost the element of privacy if they live in a small little town in Western Massachusetts where they're like one of the only people who uses the accessible equipment. So there's been a push over the last few years to advocate for equipment that provides the printout of your ballot that looks identical to everybody else's ballot. And it would be a lot easier in the world to have a digital system, but we've all learned that that's not what our election process is going to go with. That's not where our government is going. It's not where the citizenry wants to be heading. They want that verifiable, countable, physical ballot in the process, so we have to adapt to that.
Thanks so much, and thank you for the question. At this point, I want to invite folks to thank our panelists for being here and having this conversation. I want to thank our audience for some terrific questions. I want to thank our hosts for a wonderful space and wonderful accommodations to make sure that as many people as possible can participate within this. And I want to invite all of you to make your way to the back of the room. We're having a reception. I know people are showing off some different assistive technologies, maybe a chance to continue the conversation with people. Thank you all so much. It's been wonderful having this conversation here tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.